This is
declare the meeting open to the public. Just wait to see if there's anybody coming in further. All right. Okay, I just want to inform members and those in the public gallery that all electronic devices, with the exception of committee tablet devices, must be switched off completely whilst the committee is in session, as they interfere with the transmission and recording of proceedings. Members are asked to ensure that their tablets are switched to mute mode to ensure quality of sound recording. And if members are content, we will proceed through the agenda. So I just want to, in this public session, welcome the committee members and thank them for coming along to this special committee meeting. It is with considerable disappointment at the circumstances of why we have had to call this special committee meeting, but I really do appreciate members coming back out of term time to discuss the important issues before us today. This is a single item agenda today. It's consideration of recent allegations made in the media relating to the former chairperson of the previous Committee for Finance and Personnel. I will give members some opportunity to discuss the issue in front of us. I just want to outline some of my thoughts in relation to that first, and then if we just indicate in the usual manner, I will bring members in to discuss these issues. We do have a number of apologies from Claire Hanna, John O'Dowd and Ross Hussey. I think everybody else is here. So in relation to the issues before us today, I think this is an issue of considerable seriousness. I think it is important for us as a committee to really, I suppose, differentiate between a number of issues involved in this. That we're not just dealing with allegations here, but we're dealing with a series of admissions and facts, which in my view has a serious impact on this committee and the work of this committee. First of all, we've had the exchanges and the Twitter exchanges. As far as I'm aware, none of the parties to those exchanges are challenging the truthfulness or the accuracy or the factual nature of that. So we do have a series of exchanges that appear to be accepted by all parties to be a factual representation of at least part of the exchanges of communication between the chairman, an employee of the chairperson and the previous chairperson, and a witness to the previous NAMA inquiry. As I said, we are then dealing with both facts, but we're also dealing with some allegations that to this point there hasn't been evidence and hasn't been accepted, particularly in relation to some of the previous members of the committee, namely the Finance Minister, Muchin and Muller. I think first of all, if we deal with the first issue of the facts as we know it, there has been admissions in terms of the exchanges, and I think there's a number of questions that I think the committee need to consider. I think first of all, the impact of those exchanges and what we know from that on the work of the committee previously. The impact of those exchanges in relation to the legacy report which we have received, which has formed the basis and foundation for our discussions in this mandate. So I think it's still very relevant. I think there are issues to be discussed in relation to those admissions go beyond the NAMA issue, which was the subject of that particular inquiry. I think the issues to be discussed actually goes to the role of chair people of committees in relation to witness tampering, in relation to interference with witnesses, and also I think the impact of those exchanges on the decisions and objectivity of chairperson of a committee. So regardless of the issue, in this case it is in relation to the NAMA inquiry of the previous committee, but regardless of the issue being examined, I think there are important issues of process here and the impact of that moving forward. I think there's also then a number of issues in relation to the allegations which are still out there that require investigation. We know that there have been requests for those allegations to be investigated independently. We understand, although we haven't received confirmation, but we understand that that will happen, and I think it's right that that happens. But I think there are serious questions about our Finance Minister. What did he know? Had he been involved in those exchanges? did those exchanges go beyond what we know in terms of the transcript? Had there been telephone conversations, for example, between the parties and others? Had there been onward communication from the chairperson to, for example, Martin and Muller? And also, were there any meetings between the chairperson and the people involved in this, or any other witnesses? And I think these are very important issues in terms of the integrity of the previous investigation, but also the integrity and status of the legacy report produced by that committee. So I think there are a number of questions out there that require answering. I think it's important, I think it's critical to public confidence in these institutions, to public confidence in committees about the objectivity of our investigations and inquiries now and moving forward, that there is transparency, but also critically that there is fairness in all of this. I have always, and I've stated this in relation to our previous discussions on inquiries, emphasised very, very strongly that there needs to be objectivity. Our investigation should be evidence-based and it should be fair to everybody. And I certainly, as chairman of this committee, will not sit here as a judge and a jury at this stage in terms of allegations. I think it needs to be examined. Nobody is being declared guilty at this point in terms of the allegations. I think they need to be investigated fully and a conclusion drawn at the end of that process in terms of the evidence. But I do think it is critical that we examine as a matter of urgency and consider these issues. So again, I thank you for coming along to have this urgent discussion today, and I would like to open the floor for comment from our committee members. Jim Wells.
Madam Chair, only myself and I think Paul Gerben sat throughout all of these hearings into the NAMA affair. And what we noticed was that the then member and now Finance Minister played a very leading part in the interrogation of all the witnesses. In fact, I would say on many occasions he was the main person questioning evidence given to the committee. Certainly, he had obviously read up his brief extremely well on it. I find it absolutely unbelievable and inconceivable that the lead person who was questioning the NAMA witnesses was unaware of what the previous chair was up to. The previous chair has of course admitted entirely that the messages that were published in the media between him and Mr Bryson were true. Mr Bryson has confirmed that they are true, and Mr O'Hara has remained silent but has not denied the fact that they're true. So the only question that we have to ask ourselves, very simple, it reminds me, those of you, there's probably nobody old enough here to remember Watergate. No, I don't think anyone, would you remember? Well, the question is, what did he know and when did he know it? And what we've been asked to believe is that the star performer, on behalf of one group in this committee, sat through all of those hearings, particularly the one with Mr Bryson, which I remember so clearly, and he was totally oblivious to the fact that there was collusion, a word that Mr O'Millier regularly uses, that there was collusion between Mr Mackay, Mr O'Hara and Mr Bryson. Now, can we just paint the picture as one who sat, and that was a very, very important meeting of this committee, one that is sort of ingrained in my brain for life because it was such a dramatic meeting. And what I did notice is that there was the lady O'Boyle, Michaela O'Boyle, and there was Mr Muller, and there was the chair. And what I did notice is that the other two Sinn Féin representatives had written questions in front of them, ready to be asked, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's preparation, absolutely, definitely. I would encourage it. But they had written questions in front of them, ready to ask as soon as Mr Bryson had finished his evidence. Now, are we serious to believe that those two committee members did not know what Mr Mackay and the witness were up to? Because if they didn't know, they were prophetic, because the questions seemed to flow very seamlessly from Mr Bryson's evidence into the questions asked by the two Sinn Féin members of the committee. I think it's inconceivable that Mr Muller didn't know, but I accept, Madam Chair, your opinion that this is best investigated by Standards and Privileges Committee of this Assembly. And for two reasons, Mr O'Millier should step aside. The first reason is there is a cloud of doubt as to the veracity of his statement that he made yesterday, where he says he knew nothing and there was no collusion between him and Mr Mackay. But even another issue that has been missed, I think, in the media is that Mr O'Millier is the Minister of the department that's now responsible for this issue, the whole NAMA issue. And as there's a cloud of doubt as to the veracity of the statement, he should step aside to enable there to be a fair and open investigation. This is not prejudging what that investigation may come out with. There is precedent for this in the Assembly in the fact that the First Minister, faced with an identical situation where there's allegations being made, stepped aside for a short period to enable that investigation to be carried out by Standards and Privileges. And when, of course, that totally vindicated the First Minister, he came back to his position, and quite rightly so. So the precedent is very clear. Mr O'Millier should step aside. I'm sure there are people in Sinn Féin who can take up the portfolio while this is going on, and then, subject to the result of the Standards and Privileges Committee decision, he either remains an ex-Minister of Finance or he returns to his position. And I think that is the best way forward for this Assembly and for this committee, because the work of this committee has been seriously undermined by what has happened. And he, I believe, is complicit in that undermining, and he needs to step aside to give clarity and enable an open and fair investigation into what was going on.
Thank you, Jim. And I think just for the purpose of clarity, just in case members were not aware, I have also called for the Finance Minister to reflect on the ongoing situation and have stated that I believe it is right that he does step aside while the investigations are ongoing, separate from this committee, but I have called for that this morning as well, just so members are aware of that. Okay, any other members want to check?
Chair, as you have rightly alluded to in your introduction, you know, the latest revelations about the actions of Sinn Féin during the committee investigation, it has impacted, you know, in a major way, and in a major negative way, on public perception and public the confidence in the whole political process. And I think there does need to be serious clarity, and there are a number of very serious questions that do need to be answered in relation to the ongoing and the work that the previous committee did do and how that process was carried out. I mean, we need to know, what other witnesses did. Sinn Féin MLA Daithí Mackay and Sinn Féin advisor Thomas O'Hara, how did they coach other, prior to the appearance at the NAMA inquiry, other than Mr Bryson? Sinn Féin certainly haven't, addressed that issue, and it's essential that the committee gets clarity on how open and fair the process of the investigation has been, and particularly in terms of how the Chair carried out his duties in a fair and impartial way. I think, addressing Mr Wells's issue, I think the Finance Minister needs to state very, very clearly, did he receive any communication from either the committee chair or Mr O'Hara to ensure that Mr Bryson's evidence was heard in open session? I think that's a very, very important issue that needs to be clarified. Mr O'Millier said that he had no part in it. He had no knowledge of these inappropriate communications. But I think, whether he had or whether he hadn't, there's certainly in terms of the public perception, there is doubt. And I think where there is doubt, there is lack of confidence. And I think to restore that confidence, certainly Mr O'Millier does need to step aside to restore that impartiality and that confidence that the public needs. We need to know, with the current Finance Minister, was he prepped in advance of the Jimmy Bryson, the choreographed appearance of Mr Bryson at the Finance Committee? Did the Minister receive any communication from Mr Mackay or Mr O'Hara with regard to the appearance of any other witnesses. Because remember, this was not one incident in isolation we need to be considered. We need to look at the whole process from start to finish. So was there any other incidents where people were prepped and where Mr Muller was aware of? And we need to know when the joint First Minister, Martin McGuinness, was he made aware of these allegations? And at what time, when was he made aware, and what steps did he take once he found out? You know, how many members of Sinn Féin did he speak to? And again, there's another thing that Sinn Féin have failed to address. And, you know, it's not a matter of simply of Mr McGuinness or Mr Muller being sure that they had nothing or have done anything wrong. The public need to know. And that's why it's essential that Mr McGuinness is clear on when he knew about the actions of Datham Mackay and Thomas O'Hara. So I think, you know, Chair, there are significant questions there that needs to be addressed so that the public can be, you know, restored. Confidence can be restored.
Thank you. And as we have outlined, you know, I think there's much for the Finance Minister to reflect on, and there have been a number of calls for him to step aside. Regardless of his decision in relation to that, you know, it may be the case that, you know, he should take up an opportunity to come to this committee and to make clear what his involvement was. And, you know, if he has and he stated very, very clearly that he is saying that he had no involvement in this, but I suspect if that then is the case, there's no reason, I presume, why he wouldn't want to come along to this committee and make it clear to us in the context of a committee hearing as to what his involvement was and to the extent of that. Philip. Thank
you, Chair. Members have said this is very much about public confidence and about trying to instil what public confidence there was in the first place. So I think that is a challenge, and I know obviously there's a lot of media interest in this committee today, and I think that we need to be able to show some substance for our meeting today. The fact that we've been called here, I think there needs to be some actions flowing out of this here. There are certainly three things that I believe we need to focus on. The first one is just in relation to NAMA. I think it's important to say that there are still serious allegations that need to be dealt with, and the current revelations don't detract from that substance of the NAMA inquiries, and that allegations need to continue to currently be investigated. And in all honesty, this episode actually reinforces the need for the committee to continue its investigations, obviously subject to the restrictions involved during the live case that we are very much aware about. Secondly, and the Ministers for Finance has already been touched upon, and I certainly believe that Mr O'Muller needs to stand aside in the interim for many of the reasons that have already been outlined. But I think that as a committee, and I propose that we actually write to the Minister and ask him to do so, because again, this is about public confidence, and Mr Wells gave the example of the previous First Minister as a way of doing this. And I heard Mr Muller's comments yesterday, and I accept what he said, but his focus was very precise on the communications via Twitter. But we also need to ascertain, you know, were there any conversations within Sinn Féin prior to that committee meeting? Were there any direction or coordination or pre-planning amongst committee members prior to the meeting? Were SPADs involved, for example, the special advisors preparing papers or briefings before the meeting? So there's an awful lot more that needs to be investigated and discussed here, rather than just who saw what tweet or who was involved in a particular Twitter conversation. And that's why I think that we do need an inquiry. And whilst I appreciate that the Commissioner is undertaking an investigation into the role of Mr Mackay, but that is quite discreet. It's very focused on his role and his actions. And I think that from a public confidence perspective, there needs to be a wider investigation And how that is taken forward is obviously open for debate. There's a number of options. Again, Chair, and I say this with the greatest respect as well. I mean, you said this morning on the radio this is about public confidence, and I know your role has been raised before. The irony of looking back into some of the comments of the previous committee, it's very ironic that the one member who was quite vocal about your role when you came onto this committee first was Mr. O'Muir himself. When he asked whether your previous role, etc., had an impact on the role you could play on this committee. But I think that maybe there are three options that we could look at, and again, maybe that's something even for the wider Assembly more than this committee. But I know that the Assembly can set up an ad hoc committee under Standing Order 53, and maybe that is something that the wider Assembly could look at. Other options would be that this committee could look at something wider and actually call the likes of Mr. Mackay and the Minister before the committee. I have to say, if that was the case, Chair, I'm not sure in the desire to try and keep this totally transparent in terms of public confidence, whether in terms of people's previous comments about your own role, whether it would be better if there was maybe a subcommittee of this, possibly chaired by a non-executive party's MLA to maintain this transparency, because at the end of the day, as we've all agreed, the Speaker so far and yourself, Chair, on the media this morning, has said this is all about public confidence. So our drive here is to try and put actions in place that are going to try and win that back. And undoubtedly, this has sullied the whole committee process in public eyes. So we need to take serious actions that are going to have proper outputs. And I think those are some of the options before us, and I would be interested in whether committee members would support any of these, or even with maybe the committee clerk could give some guidance on the way forward here in terms of possible process that could best facilitate a more wider investigation. I think just to come here today and have conversations about it, and we'll all obviously say that this is a terrible thing that shouldn't have happened, but I think there needs to be tangible outputs here. Otherwise, I don't think we're going to improve public confidence if we don't actually take actions as a result of this meeting. And as I say, I would propose in the first instance that we write to the Minister of Finance, ask him to stand aside whilst an investigation is underway. And secondly, I would seek the committee clerk's guidance as to how we as a committee could call for or instigate a wider inquiry, not specifically on the actions of Mr. Mackay. I'm glad that's obviously the role of the Commissioner, but there's certainly a wider investigation required here, something that is public, something that is transparent, and something that can reinforce and instill the public confidence that we are all agreed we want to see back both into this committee but into the wider Assembly as well. So that would be my suggestion, Chair.
Thank you, Philip, and I can assure you as the chairperson of this committee that I am focused not just even on outputs but on outcomes, and I know that many of the members around this committee will want to get an outcome from this, and that outcome is to get to the truth of what happened and to take lessons away from this in terms of the way committees engage and conduct inquiries in the future. So this is very much an outcome-focused session. That is the reason why I requested this and called members back from recess. So I absolutely agree with you that this should not only be outcome-focused or output-focused, but also looking at the truth. What is it that we can do? And I know that I'm certainly willing to do everything that I can to play whatever role that would be useful in terms of getting to that. In relation to the second point, I think it's useful that you've outlined a number of options there. Certainly in terms of any committee scrutiny of this, as I outlined in the introduction, I think it's very important to differentiate between the substantive issues in relation to the previous inquiry by the committee in Denama and what we are looking at here today. I think what we're looking at here is a process issue very much around witness tampering, witness interference and the impact on the objectivity of decision making of the chair. Quite frankly, that would apply regardless of what the substance of any inquiry is. I think there's a wider point there. And I think that's something that potentially is within the remit of this committee to look at in terms of the chair of the Finance Committee, the role of members and the objectivity, the weighting of evidence and decision making. So I think it's important for us to differentiate between the substantive issues and the process issues that is the nature of this agenda item today. Yeah, Jonathan?
So Chair, just to slightly come back on you there, so what are you saying in terms of how we will take this forward? I mean, what's our process now to investigate this further? Because I don't think we can... the Commissioner has a key role here, obviously, but I think it's wider than that, and I think it's something that either this committee or, as I say, there are other options there to take that forward, but there needs to be a speedy and robust response to this. Otherwise, people's confidence will wither further.
I think what's emerging, and I think Jim summed it up very well in the statement of, what did he know and when did he know it? And I think that applies to the chairperson, it applies to witnesses, it applies to the allegations in relation to the Finance Minister. So, in terms of getting to the truth of that, I think there's a number of options there. There has been the suggestion from yourself to write to the Finance Minister or there's been a suggestion to writing to the Finance Minister to ask him to step aside, but I think there's also issues around writing to the Finance Minister to get clarity about this, perhaps to invite him to come along to this committee, to be questioned by the committee. The committee has an important role in relation to scrutiny. I think there is a serious public confidence issue now, given the context around the Finance Minister and the fact, as has already been outlined, that the Finance Minister has a continuing role in relation to the substantive issues in the NAMA inquiry. So I think there are serious issues around that.
So sorry, Chair, just in terms to clarify that, are we going to then, is it your intent for this committee then to proceed with a more formal investigation by calling the likes of the Minister here, possibly calling Mr Mackay here and other witnesses for this committee to produce a report of investigation?
Well, what I want to do is to allow everybody to have an opportunity to contribute to the discussion first of all and to see what the emergent suggestions are. I think then we should have a discussion around what our action points are arising from this meeting. I've suggested a number of options there. Other members have suggested options as well. So I think it's only fair to let those members who haven't spoken to speak and to make some suggestions, and then we can consider all of that.
Sure, thank you.
I would outline, as the members are aware, we've had evidence, legal advice. We've also had, during recess, the evidence session with the NCA. I think they have been very clear. So there are issues around sub judice in terms of the substantive NAMA inquiry, and therefore I think any movement forward in any investigation would need to be very tightly framed in terms of the terms of reference, and that's why I'm very clearly differentiating between substantive NAMA investigation issues and then the process and other serious facts and allegations which are before us today. So I just want to let other members have an opportunity to contribute before we come to that part of the discussion. So Jonathan, I think you're next.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for your immediate convening of the committee. I think the gravity of it can't be overestimated in the sense that we appear to have, via the resignation of the previous chair of this committee as an MLA, and there is evidence in the public domain of witness interference, witness tampering. It appears that a witness was brought before this committee, and it appears that the Sinn Féin chairperson of that committee scripted the play, which appears, from what I can see in watching the recordings of what occurred, to have been played out almost in verbatim detail to the Sinn Féin script. And I fear the quest for the truth will possibly for this committee be more of a marathon than a sprint. But we need to start somewhere. And I hope that there will not be those who will seek to delay justice. We all know in this committee, and with responsibility to the public, that where justice is delayed, effectively justice is denied. Now, there is a reference to the current Finance Minister in the detail of the papers that we have before us. And critically, it says that present Finance Minister Martin Muller was a member of the Finance Committee at the time, and the Sinn Féin back channel gives Bryson advice on when he will step in, what questions he will ask during the evidence session. So the Sinn Féin operation appears to be giving the Finance Minister advice, the current Finance Minister, then a member of the committee, advice on the timing of when they're going to step in during the committee, the nature of the questions as part of the evidence. Now, I think there's a question for all the committee members, specifically for the role that Martin Muller now has as Finance Minister to him. What communication did they have? What contact did they have, either directly or indirectly, with any of the witnesses or any of the potential list of witnesses outside of formal committee proceedings and committee meetings? We need to know, and that question will continue to be asked until an answer is given, because I think there is a public interest. The credibility and confidence has been shattered. It's not at an all-time low. It's been absolutely shattered by the revelations that have been given. They strike at the very core of the democratic process and devolution itself. So we need to know from all of the committee members what communication they had, what contact they had, either directly or indirectly, with a witness or any of those that were on the potential list of witnesses outside of the formal committee meetings. We want to know what reference they had to the inquiry. I notice just on page 14 of the evidence that was given for us to consider for this day's meeting, that there's a reference to a previous committee member. It says, "You're spot on regarding Judith Cochrane in your letter." Do we have a copy of that letter or any details of that letter?
We'd have to check from the previous mandate.
Because the reference goes in all of this right to the very heart where there is evidence setting out. Here is a draft for the closing around how to frame Robinson. These are the most serious of allegations, and every member of that committee needs to advise us. Were they in any inappropriate relationship with any witness or with any potential witness? And I think the reality, Chair, is that given the level and the shattering of public confidence revealed by what a Sinn Féin chair of this committee did in a previous mandate, given that there is reference to the finance member then of the committee, Martin Muller, now a minister, that people would be told what he would say, when he would say, at what stage he would come in, that it is now impossible, I think, in any fair-minded process for a minister to be able to carry on in office and have the confidence of the Assembly. I do believe in the fundamental of British justice that people are innocent until they are proven guilty. But in order to restore confidence, and let's face it, the Sinn Féin chair of this committee has absolutely shattered confidence in this process, that it would be impossible for the minister to do anything else other than to step aside and allow independence and allow transparency, given that he currently holds the reins in the nature of the inquiry, of which there is evidence, of which he has been named in, of people stating that they were able to get to him, to know what questions he would ask, and to know what timing in a process it would occur. I cannot conceivably see how the Minister can do anything else. And I think it perhaps is a question of if, not when, the Minister does step aside to allow these matters to be resolved and allow us to try to regain some level of credibility with the public.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. And certainly it seems at this stage that there is an emergent consensus in relation to the Minister stepping aside, and obviously that is a decision for him to make. But it is the case that we as a committee could write to the Minister and ask him to step aside, regardless of whether he remains as a Minister or he steps aside. I think there are still questions to be answered, and whether or not this committee asks those questions is up for discussion this morning, but I think there is a good opportunity for us to do that. So I think there's a lot for us to consider there. I think Paul, next.
Thank you, Chair. And just in relation to, Jim has alluded to quite a few points that I wanted to make, but the timing associated with this, that goes back to early September, where we have a trail of the tweets associated with this, would indicate that it happened even prior to us having a witness from Graham's. Now, the present Minister did allude to the fact that he had and did meet with Graham's prior to this and had been dealing with the issue. So that's a matter of record on the point. There seemed to be some indication that what had happened with Graham's was also, and I'm wondering, was it also choreographed in relation to the presentation that was made to the committee? It draws real suspicion over all aspects of this process. We do know that it has now been identified that it was choreographed, and there was definitely collusion had went on to ensure that they got an outcome and got certain people named. One thing that we wanted to ensure was that what did go on around this deal was made public and was dealt with properly. But now we have real concern over the legacy report, which was put forward from the previous committee. It has absolutely no credibility in relation to that because of what has been contrived, put forward and delivered. And the present Minister, even within the Irish News report, has been involved right from the start at some stage, whether to a greater or larger degree. But I don't accept that no one didn't know that the line of communication had been opened, and I'm just wondering, was the same line of communication opened with other witnesses who came to the committee? And as a consequence of that, I think it would require further investigation, because now I am questioning absolutely everything which was brought forward as evidence, and I do think that the Commissioner for Standards should be investigating not just what happens in this committee, but the whole process of how chairs and those on committees deal with witnesses that are brought forward, and ensuring that there is not back channels to ensure that they drive forward an agenda and basically come out to give a witch hunt. And those who are giving evidence, there has to be some mechanism to ensure that the evidence that is given is of sufficient weight and merit to bring forward and to be worthy of giving evidence to committee. I do recall the weeks prior to Mr. Bryson being brought to committee, several occasions where we said we would hear the evidence in private because we had concerns about what might be brought forward, because we had no information as to what it was, and we would be happy to hear that in private. Previous member of the committee, Judith Cochrane, did have concerns that this would be what would happen. That was said, and it turned out to be true. It was, whenever we see what was happening, it was adding to what was a bigger story. That was a witch hunt against individuals and named people that were put on that, who without any evidence, because we never seen that evidence that was supposedly in that large box
of evidence that Mr Bryson had of papers which we would like to know, had they any link to what had happened with the Graham evidence session, which was held 3 weeks prior to Mr Bryson?
I think certainly, there are serious questions here, and I think in anything that we do moving forward, that there are serious questions around the consideration of evidentiary worth. What is evidence? And in terms of hearsay, he said, she said to me, without that being backed up, without documents being verified, in a court of law, they would have very little evidentiary worth. And I think that given the seriousness of the investigations and inquiries of committees, I think there needs to be a much more professional approach by committees in terms of the examination of evidential worth of evidence.
Chair, I think what you're bringing forward is 100% right, but some of the individuals who were brought forward to give evidence had direct involvement because they were involved in losing property or whatever.
I think some, absolutely some were, but some others were not.
Others were not, and was all hearsay and what they had picked up from others. So I think there's a differential between the weight of evidential.
Well, as all members are aware, the former chair of the committee has now resigned, and I think that was the appropriate thing to do in light of the admissions around what has happened. But I think that, as you've outlined, Paul, there probably are a number of questions that still need to be answered even by the chairperson. I think there's questions around what other engagement, as I outlined in my introduction, what other engagement did he have with those named in these exchanges? In the revelations over the course of last week, did he have telephone conversations? Did he have meetings? Did they have briefings? Did they discuss questions? And I would certainly be keen to find out, did that happen? I think, as highlighted as well, were there other communications with other witnesses? Is this just limited to the individual named in these exchanges, or was this actually a course of behaviour by the previous chair? And I think very importantly as well is that did the chairperson communicate those engagements, both those mentioned in the revelations and perhaps other engagements with other witnesses, to his party colleagues, namely the Finance Minister, who has an ongoing involvement in NAMA inquiry issues in this mandate. I think there's very serious questions there. It may be the case that the committee would want to consider writing to the former chairperson of the Finance Committee and asking him for those questions. Although there may be investigations elsewhere, I think if we could establish quickly the factual context of that, which I don't think would damage any ongoing investigations, if the member was willing to cooperate with us, that would certainly help inform our next steps. Katrina?
Yeah, well, first of all, I share everyone's view here that we need absolute truth and accountability in relation to very serious allegations in relation to NAMA. And we don't want to do anything as a committee to jeopardise that. In relation to this serious issue, Dahi Mackay has resigned. He's suspended from the party. Thomas O'Hara is suspended from the party. The Assembly Standards Commissioner is investigating that, and that's important work. And Sinn Féin have said we will support and actively cooperate in that. Martin O'Mwillior has stated categorically, and I note one of the members actually misrepresented what he said, but what he actually said is, and I quote directly, "There's no basis in truth or fact. I had no part in or knowledge of these inappropriate communications." I won't be supporting writing to the Finance Minister asking him to resign. He has done nothing wrong. He has been very open and accountable in relation to what he has said, and you will note from the paper from our clerk here, this committee has no role in relation, as members of the committee will be aware, it's not within the remit of the committee to investigate the conduct of Assembly members. And with the greatest respect to what I've heard prior to what I've said here and what the Chair has said, I think we should let the person whose remit is to do the job, to do that job, which is the Assembly Commissioner. The Speaker has written to every single member, and we obviously support what the Speaker is doing in our party in relation to this, looking at the role of committees, and he's going to be issuing guidance in relation to that. So I think this committee just needs to understand our role in relation to procedures and processes in the Assembly. Martin McGuinness has stated unequivocally that Sinn Féin had no knowledge of the contact in relation to Jamie Bryson and Dahi Mackay. So what I would be advising this committee strongly is that we let the processes do their work. There is an investigation ongoing, and I don't think we should be jeopardising or interfering in any way in that investigation. And Sinn Féin very much look forward to working with that investigation.
Thank you, Katrina.
One point could I just raise within that in relation to the Finance Minister currently, and I've also said of all other members of that committee, they need to tell us, were they involved in any inappropriate relationships? Did they communicate, not just on this specific issue, did they communicate of the evidence we have in front of us, but did they communicate with any other witness on the potential list of witnesses that we have? Did they have any contact with them, directly or indirectly? With any witness outside of the formal committee process? Or were they involved in any inappropriate relationships with any witness or potential witness outside of the formal committee proceedings? Now, the Finance Minister has abjectly not answered that question, and I think both he and the other men and women who were on the committee should have the opportunity to tell us what communications, if any, they had, what contact they had, either directly or indirectly, with any witness that has been called or any of the potential list of witnesses that were to be called, or were they involved in any inappropriate relationships with them? Those are questions that have singularly not been answered.
Thank you, Jonathan. I know Jim is it.
Can I just respond as well? You know, these are all the questions that I asked when I spoke at the beginning. And I would say that, you know, regardless to whether there's any truth or whether there's any substance to possibly accusations that are made against the Minister or whatever, I think when you're serving in high office, you know, you need to be seen to be acting without any cloud of doubt or uncertainty around your business. And that is not there. And I think the Minister needs to take that into account. He needs to be aware that the public are, the confidence has been so seriously eroded and damaged that he can't possibly continue, regardless of whether he is guilty of any misdemeanours or inappropriate behaviour or not.
Okay, thank you. And I certainly think that, and I'm raising this so that the committee members can consider this. I know Jim has indicated that you want to bring you in just shortly. Is that, you know, I do think that there are issues around an independent investigation in terms of the conduct, and we're all subject to the Commissioner for Standards and Privileges. We understand there will be an investigation into an individual, and all individual MLAs are bound by that code of conduct, and that's what will be investigated. I think there are issues certainly emerging here in relation to the responsibilities as an office of chairperson of this committee, or in the office of a minister, and this committee does have a very legitimate role in relation to scrutiny of ministers and scrutiny of others. And you know, I think it's certainly for us to discuss if we think it's appropriate, given the ongoing NAMA inquiry and responsibilities of the Finance Minister, that these are ongoing issues that require committee scrutiny, as opposed to just an investigation by the Commissioner for Standards and Privileges. And there's no reason why that can't happen, I think, in parallel as well. But for members to consider that, we'll bring that together in discussion after Jim has contributed.
Thank you. I think there's no doubt that these appalling revelations have severely bruised the entire committee process. I think the question now is, or one of the questions is, what are the various courses of action that can be taken to redeem some of that? it's quite clear that the Commissioner for Standards has a role, and he must fulfil that. It's also probably correct that the Chairman's Liaison Committee has some matters to look at. But much as Ms. Ryan might like it, I don't think that excludes this committee from the direct exercise of its functions. And I think we do need to begin to establish some of the outstanding and as yet hidden facts of this matter. It would be important to seek the question, and perhaps the former clerk of the committee could shed some light on this. How was contact initiated between Mr. Bryson and the chair? As the normal expectation would be that the clerk would communicate with an upcoming witness to explain the protocols and answer any practical questions. So, at what point did that move from that normal process to the abnormal process of the chair involvement and his direct communication? And was the committee clerk, who wasn't, of course, our current clerk, had he any knowledge or insight into any of that? And I think within the process of the Assembly, we're entitled to ask about that. Then, as others have said, there's a very important continuing issue of the scale of knowledge of other members, because it's quite clear, since there was a party interest, in respect of the chair in getting Mr. Bryson's evidence into public, and that seems to have been the whole issue and thrust of the email exchange, to make sure that that which was going to be said was said in public, not private session. And as part of that, it seems to emerge from those emails that Mr. Bryson's opening statement was shared. Now, with whom was it shared? Was it just shared with the chair? Or was it shared with other members of the committee? I think that's something that can be legitimately explored. And in terms of the finance minister, it's quite clear that the author of the emails, and I don't believe for one moment the author was Mr. O'Hara, but whoever the author of the emails was, it's quite clear that they had an expectation of a helpful role being played by Mr. Amelia, because the email on the 22nd of September at 22:01 hours expressly anticipates some helpful intervention from Mr. Amelia, which would help get the matter from private into public. And it's interesting then, when you go to the Hansard of that session, when that decision was taken, that Mr. Amelia made this observation: I think that the public is desperate to find out who was going to benefit from this fixed, crooked, corrupt deal. I believe that Mr. Bryson will be able to help us in that. And what was the basis of that belief? Where was that belief grounded? Was it grounded from prior sight of the opening statement with the references to person A, B, C, D, and E? Or was it grounded in something else? Because if he publicly expressed a belief in support of the evidence being given in public that Mr. Bryson would be able to help us in that, then it had to be grounded in something. And in expressing that opinion, of course, he fulfilled the anticipation of the author of the email that he would make a helpful intervention. And therefore, I think it's not enough for the present minister to simply say, I knew nothing of these communications. I think there are many more probing questions in that regard. As to how we take that forward, well, I suppose the committee certainly can ask Mr O'Meara to come before them. But I think before we were to do that, we should give him the opportunity of providing and responding to the request to provide all the communications that there had been with him as a committee member, so that he can lay out for us what those communications were. And then I think there may well be a role on foot of that for Mr O'Meara to appear before the committee and to be probed about those issues. Another option the committee has, of course, is as a committee to table a motion in the House calling on him to stand down or more. So the committee has various options in that regard. One thing, I want to move on and say something else. I sense from some members, particularly the DUP members of this committee, who never wanted the NAMA inquiry, who never in the course of it asked a single probing question. I sense from some of them that they see this as an opportunity to bury the NAMA issue, or at least to bury the legacy report. Yes, the legacy report is the product of the former committee, and I think it's important that the public understand the former committee, not this committee, that is in any way tainted by this matter. But the legacy report is not something which in consequence simply goes in the bin. It's something which has important information within it. And of course you read it with the knowledge and the consciousness that there was collusion between Sinn Féin and at least one witness in respect of it. But you still, I believe, would not be justified in burying it or putting it in. And I think there is a bit of, maybe an element of faux anger about all this for the purpose of attaining that. Yes, these are atrocious things that happened, should not have happened. But we need to, some are very anxious to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this issue. And I think it's also important going forward for public confidence that the objective of this being an end of this committee's interest in NAMA, that objective is not obtained. Because I think public expectation and something that would contribute to the rehabilitation of public confidence in this committee is that in spite of anything that's happened, that there are still issues to be investigated when they can be investigated, subject to the constraints of the NCA. But this committee is not giving up or walking away from that responsibility, however much some might like it, and that those issues will have to, at the appropriate time, be further and properly investigated. And that brings me to this observation, Chair. This committee now has to be whiter than white. We have to be like Caesar's wife, beyond reproach. And therefore, if and when we do come to further NAMA investigations, I have to say, I think it would be wholly inappropriate if you, Chair, were to chair the committee at that point. Because you are the wife of someone who's already given evidence to the previous committee, somebody from the heart of DFP at the time when all the goings-on were going on in respect of NAMA, someone whose evidence was described and can only be described as vague and evasive and selective in his memory. And therefore to suggest that the wife of someone who themselves was nominated to sit on the NAMA Advisory Committee could, from the point of view of public perception, chair further investigations into NAMA, I think that is stretching public credulity just too far. So I think that when we come to that point, you as chair have to consider your position in regard to that, because I think the perception and the necessity for utter transparency will be necessary in all of that. And just as the Finance Minister has perceptions to deal with, so I think you as Chair at that point would have perceptions to deal with, which I think could only be dealt with by you disengaging from the committee's deliberations and certainly from chairing it. So I think there are serious issues here. I think there are things the committee can do. I'm not at all impressed by the litany of Sinn Féin denials. Every controversial issue in our province's history, every time there's been Sinn Féin has been caught out, it has started with a solemn denial. And of course, the truth has always turned out to be quite different. So I don't think we can be distracted by that. And I think therefore we need to, as a committee, proceed to do our part, not treading on the toes of the Commissioner or in the Committee of Liaison Committee, but doing our part in inquiring and investigating as best we can, particularly focused on the present Finance Minister, given that NAMA remains within his bailiwick and therefore his knowledge, Jim Well said, what he knew and when he knew it, are very relevant to this, and I think we should begin that process by giving him the opportunity to convey all the communications he had, with a view to probably bringing them then hereafter for the committee.
Okay, thank you, Jim. As the member is aware, and as we are all aware, given the briefing that we've had from the NCA and given the legal advice that we have, the substantive NAM inquiry is considered sub judice currently. That is not to say, and I don't think any member of this committee in our discussions thus far has indicated any unwillingness to look at the detail and continue those investigations when we can, and my sense is that the committee will do that in due course whenever we get the advice that we can proceed on. Currently it is sub judice. I think we all want to protect the opportunity for justice in this case, and we know that the NCA is continuing to investigate that, but I'm sure the member and other members will want to consider the issues that he raises at that time whenever we look at perhaps moving that forward following NCA investigations and the outcome of that. In relation to the other issues the member has raised, I think there are a number of recommendations and suggestions coming forward. I'm going to try to summarise, I think, what I've heard so far for consideration, and then we can agree a course of action. I think, first of all, there has been a suggestion about writing to Martin O'Muller, the Finance Minister. There has been a suggestion that that letter should include a recommendation that he steps aside while investigations are ongoing. There has been a suggestion that that letter should request all information in terms of any communications or exchanges with the chairperson in relation to the witnesses in the NAMA inquiry of the previous mandate of the previous committee. There's been a suggestion that the letter could include an invitation to the Minister to come along and take the opportunity to clarify his role to this committee, very much as part of this committee's scrutiny role of the Office of Minister of Finance and the Department. So I think there's three suggestions there. There's also been some discussion of should we ask him for the information and the exchanges first of all in that letter, and then on the back of that, do we want to invite him subsequently? We could include that in the letter, that would be our intention on the back of him supplying that information. That's potentially a first action point. There has been...
Madam Chair, I think a request, I think we should demand that the Minister comes before us.
Yes, I was using the terminology request, but this is very much...
There's no option here. Yes. He must come, and if he doesn't, we have powers as a committee to force him to come.
Yeah, well, I think in the first instance, we would request and hope that request is answered favourably. If it's not, then we do have...
He needs to know that this committee is serious, and if he decides to evade the issue... And I just want to make the point, Ms Fitzgerald's comment, there is precedent here involving three of our own ministers, including myself, where there wasn't the same consideration given. All three, her party demanded our heads on a plate. I resigned, and subsequently a court case has proved I was entirely innocent of the allegations made against me. In the other case, with Peter Robinson's case, standards and privilege cleared him and exonerated him. Yet there isn't the same consideration given for DUP ministers. But Ms Ruan has been very, very sympathetic towards Mr Muller. And I think the same principle should apply. If it was right for those 3 ministers to step aside, it's right for Mr Muller to do the same.
Okay, well, thank you, Jim. You're absolutely right in terms of the powers that this committee potentially has if a person doesn't want to cooperate. And I know that the clerk has helpfully provided some advices in relation to that. So if we're content, my sense is that with the exception of Katrina, everybody was content to write to the Finance Minister, and that letter would include a request for him to step aside while investigations are ongoing, and that we would ask him to attend this committee, but before he does that he should supply us with information of any communications that he's had with the committee chair in relation to these revelations or any other witnesses, and that if he has had communications, that he supplies us with the transcript of those prior to him appearing to this committee.
Not just
anything
communications with the with or on behalf of the committee chair. I think we need to word it in such a way that it poses various obvious loopholes of different conduits.
And I'm happy to note for the minute that you're not content with that approach.
No, I'm not content. One, I believe that there is already a procedure or a process underway, and the committee, I believe, is stepping outside its role in relation to that. What we have is petty party politicking, with the greatest respect to people here. We have an important job to do, and getting to the truth is very important in relation to NAMA, but also in relation to what happened here. And as I stated, Dahi Mackay has resigned. Sinn Féin will be cooperating fully with the inquiry, and the place for the inquiry to take place is with the Commissioner for Standards. So I have no issue with a committee carrying out scrutiny. But where I think, if we look at the advice given us by the clerk, I think where we need to be very careful is that we don't step into a role of investigating, because that is not our role, and I think we're in danger of doing that. I want to see openness and transparency. Sinn Féin want to see openness and transparency. But what I would ask is that people desist from party politicking.
I think we'll certainly note your concerns that you've raised there. I think it is important to state very clearly, and as chairperson of this committee, I want to state this very clearly, that I think any request for the Finance Minister to step aside is not a judgment as to whether or not he is guilty of any allegations. I think it is a case of, for public confidence, that if he steps aside, as other ministers have done in the past, to allow for a full investigation. And then, in the conclusion of that investigation, then it is a matter for the Minister and for the Assembly in relation to whether or not the conclusions mean that he should resign or he should continue. Ultimately, this is a request for him to step aside from the committee. It will be a decision for him. I think there's much for him to reflect on. You've raised the issue about party politicking, but all other members of this committee have raised serious concerns here. And the connection to this came about by a member of Sinn Féin, connecting him to these allegations, and I think it is legitimate for us to ask the Minister to clarify those. So this is very much an opportunity for him to clarify and to give confidence to this committee as well, but we certainly will note your concerns in relation to that.
Chair, there were other Sinn Féin members of the committee, and I think every committee member should be given the opportunity to tell us if they are aware of any contact, either directly or indirectly, with any witness outside of these proceedings. I mean, we shouldn't be singling one member out. Let's ask them all to give us the information. Were they involved in any inappropriate relationship? Were they involved in any direct or indirect contact with any witness or potential witness to this inquiry? And I think the committee members should be afforded that opportunity to give us that information.
And just, I think it may be useful, given the seriousness of it, that that's put to a vote rather than just my concerns be
No, absolutely, and I'd indicated that we will note your concerns because nobody else had indicated, but certainly I am happy to put that to a formal vote. Can I put that formally then? Are we in agreement that, first of all, that we write to the Finance Minister? All those in agreement?
But can we also deal with the issue of the other committee members?
Yes, we'll deal with that in due course, but we're dealing specifically, there's an action point, a number of action points here in terms of letters arising from the discussions, but we can get onto that.
But it's an action point
I'll add that to
I think needs to be with the other committee members. I think they've got to be given their opportunity as well.
Okay.
Chair, can I just make a comment? Because I'm rather quite annoyed at Mr. Ryan's comments, claiming that this business this morning is simply petty politicking. Considering the nature and scale of events of this last while and the implications that had for putting the public life of the ministers and people in high office, I think is inappropriate. We would be feeling in our duty if we didn't ask a minister to answer the questions that we think are important, as it does for all the others. And I think, it's always right that innocence, a person is innocent and proven guilty. But in terms of, public office, perception is as important almost as the fact at times. And I think anyone with any integrity who believes that they are being sullied, or there's any doubt or any lack of credibility around the work that they have done in the past or are currently doing, needs to be challenged, and they need to take the appropriate action. And I believe that for questions and things that we have put to the Minister today is totally appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, can we then, I'll formally put that to the vote, that I'll try to go through this in detail just to make sure that we're absolutely clear about these actions. So first of all, are we content that we write to the Finance Minister? All those in favour?
Right, saying what?
First of all, that we write, and then I'm going to go through what the substance of those letters, because I think we've got 3 suggestions in terms of what that will include.
Well, maybe you need to...
Okay, well, in the first instance, are we content that we write to the Finance Minister and that we ask him for all communications or exchanges with the Chairman of the Committee in relation to witnesses in the NAMA inquiry, or any communications or exchanges on behalf of the Chairperson of the Committee?
Or anyone else.
Or any other exchanges.
In relation to the NAMA Committee. I'll just try to get this as exact as possible to give guidance to the Department's letter. So are we content that we write, first of all, and the letter includes that request? All those in favour?
Agreed.
All those against?
And could I just clarify, I'm against on the basis it's not up to us to carry out the inquiry, it is up to the Commissioner for Standards.
At this stage, there has been no agreement to carry out an inquiry. It's a request for information at this stage, but I think your comments are clearly noted. Are we also content that that letter will include a request for the Finance Minister to step aside while investigations are ongoing?
Agreed.
All those in favour?
Agreed.
All those against? And are we content that we request that the Finance Minister attends this committee to answer questions in relation to these revelations? All those in favour?
After he gives the
I was going to add
communications.
that.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
sorry, is it the after, or because you didn't say after?
Well, I think what I would be, so I think if we can draft this up, I think it's important that we ask him to come along. If he decides not, so if he says that there's no exchanges or no communications, I still think that he needs to come along.
Yep.
I think if he says that there are communications and exchanges, but he will not share them with us, I still think he needs to come along. So I think it's phrasing in a way of we are requesting that he gives us this information before he attends, but regardless of the outcome of that, he needs to attend in any event.
There also, Chair, needs to be a reasonable timescale here.
Yeah.
Because it take a while for documentation, etc., if that's what people want. So I think this needs to be done quickly, back to the public credibility.
So should we ask that if at all possible or practical, he should supply this information if it exists to us before he appears, that we will be seeking for him to appear to this committee as soon as possible to
Why do we
answer
ask him
urgent
to
questions.
provide the material within 7 days?
We'll ask for it within 7 days if it exists. Okay.
So the request is that Martin Muller attends the committee following a response to the information requested by the committee.
No, I think we need to say that we want the Minister to attend the committee, and we would prefer, or strongly prefer, that if he has any information, this is supplied to us before his appearance within 7 days. But if that is not possible, we will still be requesting that he urgently appears before this committee. I don't want a situation where, I think if we draft that up and we take a look at that, we'd circulate the letter as well to make sure that it's very clear as to what we want.
Sure, so we can include that in the correspondence to the individual. And so therefore, just to get it clear what the committee is voting on, what the proposal is, it's to request that Martin O'Muller attends the committee following a response to the request for information.
And we want the Minister to attend the committee, and in relation to the request for information, if there is information in relation to communications or exchanges, that this should be supplied to the committee before he appears. So
we're asking for the transcripts, or whatever you call them, and then offering 7 days for that, and then saying thereafter we wish you to appear.
We don't. I think my sense about what the consensus is that we don't want the Finance Minister to have the appearance in the committee dependent on whether or not
No, it's not conditional on
to share the information. So I just want to be clear that it's not in that way.
After.
Okay. So is everybody content with that course of action? All those in?
Sorry, Chair. Yes.
All those in favour?
Well, I'm sure Martin O'Muller has no issue in coming to this committee. So I'm not going to vote against that proposal. What I am concerned about is this committee trying to usurp the role of the procedures that were established to investigate. So in relation to this issue, I have no problem with the letter going in relation to that. The other issues I do have a problem with.
And I would suggest that the committee would probably want to discuss whether, the next steps after we look at the response from the Finance Minister. So, the issues I think that you raise will come up at that time. We're simply asking at this stage for some factual information to be supplied. If there is no information there, the answer is simple from the Finance Minister. If there is information there and that is shared, I think then it's fair that everybody considers that and then see who is the appropriate person to investigate that. And that certainly, any information, of course, could be forwarded to the Commissioner for Standards and Privileges as well, if that was the most appropriate action. Okay, the second suggestion then is that we write to the former Chairperson of the Finance and Personnel Committee, Daithí Mackay, and that in that correspondence we ask him, had he had any other engagement with the witness mentioned in the revelations, including any meetings with him or telephone conversations or briefing sessions with him outside the context of the Twitter direct mail exchanges, direct message exchanges. Secondly, did he have any other communication, should it be by social media DMs, emails, meetings or telephone conversations with any other witnesses to the inquiry? And thirdly, did he communicate his exchanges with Jamie Bryson, or his employees' exchanges with Jamie Bryson, to Martin O'Muller? Did he exchange or communicate that it had happened and what the detail of those communications were? Did he communicate with Martin O'Muller any information about any other communication with any other witnesses? Did he brief his party colleague or any of his party colleagues, picking up on the point raised by Jonathan, in relation to both the communications with Jamie Bryson as a witness or any other witnesses? Is there anything that we're missing there?
Secretary, the committee's secretariat.
Oh no, I'm getting to that point. I'm just dealing with the letter to Daithí Mackay.
Could we identify the owner, if that's the word, of the email address Hunchin Tom, to which the opening statement was sent?
But should we ask that in the letter of Daithí Mackay to identify who that person is and supply contact details?
I think, if I recall correctly, that's to whom the opening statement was sent.
Yeah.
In the emails.
Okay, so Are we content, and put this to a formal vote, are we content that
Can I just clarify that it's not just with the witness, Jamie Bryson, it's with any witness or any of the potential witnesses on the list?
Yes,
that we
absolutely.
asked for that detail.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's in there.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm happy to go along with that proposal, but anybody that has information of any inappropriate relationships or any level of contact, directly or indirectly, with any of the witnesses or potential witnesses, I think the point should be made from this committee that it is incumbent on them to bring that forward to the committee in order for us to have full transparency.
I think it's also important to highlight, again, touching on some of the issues discussed, that this isn't a case of investigating at this stage. We are asking for this information to inform us in relation to our scrutiny role,
yes,
particularly of the Finance Minister, but also the impact on the report as raised by Mr Allister. Yes,
well, could I just say, Chair, with the greatest respect, it sounds very much to me like we have crossed a line here, or this committee have crossed a line. It is the job of the Commissioner to investigate this, and I would suggest that instead of us writing to Daithí Mackay in relation to this, that we should be encouraging people to provide any information to the Commissioner for standards. But we have crossed a line here, and I will not be supporting this.
Okay, we will note your concerns in relation to that. So I'll put that to a formal vote. All those in favour of writing to Daithí Mackay in order to get this information as outlined, raise your hands. Those against? Okay, that's noted. There's also then been a suggestion from a member to write to the clerk of the committee at that time. I'm not sure if you want to come in to speak to that, Jim.
Sorry, what's the proposal?
So I think the proposal was to write to the clerk and to ask the clerk how the contact with the witness named in the revelations, how that came about and what communication there was with him, just to...
Whether he can shed any light on how that progressed to contact with the chair.
Again, I think it would just be a fact finding, what was the nature of
Would
that?
Would it not be a chair's, if, and I'm just says, if somebody did come forward with some information to a chair, would it not be the chair's responsibility to ensure that they imparted that information to the secretariat of the committee, so that other committee members would be made privy to the same information? So on the basis of that, we need to probably ask the same question to Mr Mackay in his letter. Did he inform the Secretariat of the information that he had received? Because if he hadn't, that's a problem.
Okay, well, are we in agreement then that we will amend what was agreed in the Daithí Mackay letter to include asking him did he pass this information to the clerk at the time? All those in favour? Those against? And that that we will write. So there's then a suggestion that we should write to the clerk. Do you want to speak to that?
Chair, it may be helpful to, because this widens it, to get advice from the clerk assistant at this stage in relation to that.
Okay. Yeah. I'll invite the clerk assistant to speak to that matter.
It'll not take very long. I mean, if there's information which we have, which the committee requires, we'll provide information in relation to that. The only other point I would make, just in terms of the wider investigation, there's obviously some specific issues have been raised, but we're happy to bring, options around if there is thoughts about wider issues to be looked at. Obviously, the committee have made some specific suggestions. You're aware we flagged up, obviously, the Commissioner's investigation. So certainly, if the committee is looking to go beyond or extend that, I would encourage the committee to give us the opportunity to give you some options in relation to what that might be. But in terms of the specific issue, we'll provide whatever information.
Okay, and I do have that down as an action point, so we will get to that in terms of an options paper for the steps forward. But there has been a suggestion then that we write to the clerk and that we ask the clerk, did the chairperson of the committee, Daithí Mackay, communicate this information to the clerk? And then also to ask the clerk how the contact with that witness was initiated.
And whether he can shed any light on that moving to contact with the chair.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question? Presumably the clerk should be cooperating fully with the Commissioner for Standards.
Absolutely.
And dealing with every single aspect.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Could I ask a question? Is there anything that has been agreed by the committee for the content of these letters which you think crosses any line?
Well, certainly, I mean, I've outlined to the committee our concern is that due process in terms of complaints in relation to members, the committee seeking information, the committee may wish to seek information. Being honest, of course, then there's the question, what is done with that information, and when does a request for information turn into an investigation? That's why I would suggest, in terms of the wider issue, that you do give us the opportunity to then bring options to the committee in terms of how that can be dealt with appropriately.
But there's no reason why these letters shouldn't go.
There are no issues in terms of that I'm aware of, other than being conscious of the other investigations in asking for information. But clearly, you know, I think members can understand asking for information may be the start of another process. And I think the other issue that, and I can't advise in this, if the committee requires it, they need to seek some legal advice, is just what constraints may operate on others. We have flagged in your paper that there are constraints where there are commissioner investigations. That does not, of course, prevent a question being asked. It may have an implication as to the extent to which it's answered.
Chair, can I just ask, on that subject then, we were writing to Mr Mackay, obviously we were writing to Mr O'Muir. We're asking Mr O'Muir to come before us. Are we able to call for Mr Mackay to come at this stage? I think that would be very beneficial, but I'm conscious, obviously, there's another...
I mean, I guess the wider this goes, the more I would encourage the committee to give us an opportunity to give you advice in relation to that. I mean, obviously there are certain decisions the committee have indicated they wish to make. Each time that extends, of course, that becomes more likely that it is overlapping with other investigations. Perhaps the committee could be encouraged to think that it has asked some questions and that it gives us an opportunity then to bring forward further advice before this continues to extend. But that's a matter for the committee to consider.
It's just my concern. I encountered somebody in the way up here today. They looked at my tie and said there's as much chance of the Assembly getting to the bottom of this as pink elephants jumping over Stormont. And I think that we've all talked about credibility, and I appreciate there is an investigation underway, but I suspect that that's going to be quite discreet on what Mr Mackay has done or not done. This, to me, and the role of this committee or whatever other body takes us forward, is about being transparent, it's about shedding light, and it's about getting back that credibility. The more that we can do in the public sphere and the more that we can improve public confidence, the better. So anything, you know, if we could summon Mr Mackay, I think it would be very beneficial.
I do think that at this stage, what we're engaged in is trying to establish some facts, and in my view, I don't think that offends any principles as outlined in this paper. But what I would say is that it is up to this committee to discuss that and to agree a way forward. And if this committee agrees, perhaps once we get that information, that we want to look into that further. You know, my recommendation as chairperson of this inquiry is that we look very carefully then at the terms of reference of that to make sure that we're not breaching, for example, the sub judice issue in terms of the substantive NAMA issues, but also that we're not prejudicing the independent investigation either. And I certainly know that, you know, my sense is that there's no member around this committee that would want in any way to prejudice those investigations. So I think, you know, we want to be useful, we want to be helpful, we want to in order to reach the objective of getting to the truth of this. But in doing what we can do, we shouldn't be prejudicing anything else. And so I think that depending on the information that we get in, and I've got an action point here about options, but it may be that that options paper would be better informed on the back of the information that we would get. In relation to calling of witnesses, I think Martin O'Muir, as Finance Minister, there's a very legitimate role of the committee there in terms of scrutiny. I think it's also providing the Minister an opportunity to come along and to make it clear. You know, he's made statements to the media. I think it would be appropriate for him to come and make and answer questions here. If he has nothing to hide and there's no issues, I think this is a good opportunity for him to make that clear, but also an opportunity for members to engage in that scrutiny role. In relation to the former chairperson of the committee, that may be part of then of a terms of reference type investigation, and we need to be very careful then because there is that referral to the commissioner. So I don't think any harm is done by asking for the information, but it may be, Philip, that the appropriate time for us to consider whether we want to call him is on the back of that information and after we get the options paper. But I think that needs to be done quite quickly.
Chair, just a final question. In terms of timeliness of the Commissioner's review, I'm conscious that there's a public expectation here, and the longer things go on, obviously, the more they move from the public eye. Do we know, is there a time scale set for that Commissioner's review?
The Commissioner is quite restricted in what he can say by the legislation. I mean, the committee could ask. Knowing what I know about the law, I'm not sure that the Commissioner could answer. Now, whether the Commissioner is aware even of that yet or whether it's too early, but in your paper we've flagged that there are restrictions in the Act which governs the Commissioner's work, what he can say, and some members will be aware that, in essence, that there's been requests for him to confirm complaints. We have used what is in the public domain to inform you. So the committee could ask that question. I'm not sure, unfortunately, the Commissioner would actually be lawfully able to answer you.
But he may decide to do so, and I should say and absolutely clarify at this stage, I am a member of the Committee for Standards and Privileges. I'm not sure if anybody else is on this committee. It hasn't met, it hasn't, so, but we can deal with that in due course. But it may be the case that we want to write to the Commissioner to ask him, can he confirm that there is an investigation?
Well, I think if he was going to conduct it in a speedy fashion, then it may mean that our investigations may not overlap, and that would give us more freedom possibly going forward. But if his was going to take, and I have no idea what the timeline is in these sorts of investigations, but if it was going to be months rather than weeks, then obviously that may stymie our scope, and I was just seeking guidance on.
But surely we're not investigating Mr. Mackay.
No, we're not. No.
The Commissioner's doing that. So far as we're investigating, it's matters pertaining to the Minister.
It is. And I actually think terms of reference then would make that absolutely clear. And I think that's where terms of reference would be useful in this situation, and we can deal with that once we get the factual information, if we get that factual information.
Chair,
Yes, Chair.
as this discussion develops, I have absolutely no issue with doing whatever is necessary to shine light into any dark corners, whatever, to establish the truth and, to restore public confidence in the system. But you have just said that you're a member of the Standards and Privileges Committee, and I think, taking into account what is contained in some of the emails by Mr. Bryson, making accusations, and taking into account your connection with some of those people, I mean, I am now getting worried about your own situation as chair of this committee.
No, I'm a member of the Standards and Privileges Committee in this mandate. That committee has not yet met in relation to any of these issues. Now, it may be the case that I absent myself from that committee if the committee is continued. Yeah. It is the Commissioner for Standards and Privileges that examines this issue. I just think I won't be considering this at all. So I can assure the member that there's no, in my view, there's currently no issue whatsoever, and it may be better than I absent myself from
Chair, I'm just making the point in terms of, because of the integrity that we try to ensure, prevails throughout all the system of investigation, whatever. And I think because of, as chair of this committee, and with your connections to some of the people involved in the emails, that there's a question mark then possibly over your credibility as chair of this committee, and possibly you should consider, your position as well. It's just a concern I have, because
we are looking at a process point around tampering with witnesses. Yeah. We're not looking at any of the other issues here. And, I think, to be fair, Jerry, in terms of political parties, we're all part of political parties, and those political parties have been involved either in government or in the Assembly in relation to the last mandate. So there will always be some connections there. And, I can assure the member, absolutely assure the member, that this, in terms of my role, absolute utmost transparency, I'm coming to this absolutely with clean hands. And if there's any issue that arises, I will raise this at the earliest possible opportunity. At this stage, we're simply trying to establish facts. We're not, and I will emphasise this again, we are not carrying on any investigation. We're trying to establish some facts. And I think that's the appropriate thing to do to inform us in terms of discussion of the way forward. And I think that the action point here is in relation to writing to the clerk to simply establish, was that exchange communicated to the clerk? I think that's been helpful in terms of that advice. There is an action point here around an options paper, and again, it's about being fully informed by advices at that point, and we'll get to that. But the suggestion here is that we simply write to the clerk and ask them, was these exchanges a knowledge of those communicated from the former chairperson to the clerk? And then also in relation to how the contact with the witness referenced in the revelations, how that was initiated. Katrina,
Chair, I just
don't want to keep
comment. I hope you do appreciate that my remarks are not coming from because of any malice or any petty political manoeuvres. It's simply a concern I have, and I'm trying to maintain integrity of this committee as well as the whole process.
And I think the key thing here is to try to distill and be very clear about what our actions are, and to ensure that all of those actions at this stage are appropriate, and I think that's what we're trying to do. And I know we're just going through it in a lot of detail, but I think it is important that we are very clear, and we're simply writing letters to seek facts at this point. And I don't want to get into repeating some of the issues. I'm not sure, Katrina, did you indicate that you wanted to speak?
I did. I indicated about 6 times. First of all, I think it would have been useful to hear the information that we heard from Damien there before, at the start of this discussion. It certainly would have informed me, and I hope other people, in relation to course of action. What I'm hearing is that we need to be very, very careful that we don't overstep our role and that we don't take on an investigative role. Certainly looking at the detailed questions, and I'm all for transparency, I do believe we've overstepped that, and I really think I'd like that the clerk looks at this in relation to ensuring that we don't jeopardise in any way either the investigation into NAMA or indeed the Commissioner for Standards investigation, or indeed usurp the role of the Speaker of the Assembly, which is to look at Chairperson's liaisons group and how committees work. The committee's role is not to investigate, it's to scrutinise, and I really do believe we're going beyond that now, and now we're descending into a discussion around whether there's conflicts of interest for Chairperson or not, and I'm sure there'll be conflicts of interest for everyone here sitting in the committee, and I just think we need to be very careful, and I just advise the committee in relation to that. So I've noted exactly what Damien has said here, and I just would like that on record.
Okay, thank you.
But I hope Mr. Allen would also realise our purpose is scrutiny.
No,
and we are going to scrutinise.
I have no issue.
If I can finish
Jonathan,
that,
I have no issue with scrutiny.
We are going to scrutinise. There will not be any level of obfuscation. This committee has been brought into significant disrepute by the actions of a Sinn Féin chairperson of it. We have witness tampering. We have statements of resignation. We have the utmost in terms of a challenge to the democratic process of this committee. And make no mistake, the eyes of Northern Ireland are on this committee to scrutinise, to do the job in legislation they have been given and we have been privileged to do. And nobody should seek to obfuscate or delay that immediate scrutiny that is required. I mean, we have got ourselves into an awful tangle because of the actions of a Sinn Féin chairperson. We first of all have to scrutinise and untangle that knot before we can go forward. And make no mistake, there will be scrutiny.
Okay,
Sorry, Chair. I'd just like to say, just for the record, I absolutely agree. I'm all for the utmost scrutiny, and I want to see scrutiny. The issue here is who is doing the investigation. This isn't who is scrutinising. Maybe Jonathan didn't hear that. This is about, there's an investigation, and we're all experienced politicians here. That investigation has to be carried out by the proper commissioner who is doing that. And then there's scrutiny, and the scrutiny has to be carried out by this committee. But what you don't do, Jonathan, what you don't do is take on a role that you're not supposed to take on, and that you cross the line. You will note the information, written information and guidance here to us, that this committee is not a committee to investigate. And that's really what I'm saying, because the biggest issue here is the whole issue of NAMA and transparency and truth in relation to that.
I think these issues have been fully aired, and we absolutely have clarity in relation to your position on this. And I can assure all members that this committee will scrutinise and will continue to scrutinise. We do have a statutory duty, and we will fully fulfil that. But more importantly, there is a public confidence issue here. We do not, and I will reiterate this absolutely clearly, we do not want to prejudice any other inquiries, particularly independent inquiries, and we will not do that. So, you know, we will take advice on that. I do want to put the action point to the committee. So the suggestion is that we write to the clerk and that we ask the clerk, did the then chairperson of the Committee for Finance and Personnel communicate the exchanges that have been revealed this week to the clerk, to ask the clerk to outline how the contact with the witness outlined in those revelations was initiated. Is there anything else on that?
And can he, maybe that includes it, can he shed any light on how contact moved from him to chair?
Okay, so all those in agreement with sending that letter to the previous clerk? Those against?
I'll be supporting the Commissioner for Standards investigation.
And certainly I will as well. But okay, there's been, I would also suggest, there's clearly been information that the Irish News and others have received in terms of the detail of these exchanges. I think some of that has been printed in terms of reports. I would be keen to ensure that this committee does have full access to the full transcripts of the information. I'm not sure if that has been fully in the public space at this stage, but it may be for us to be completely informed as fact-finding. We may want to write and request that we have a full copy of, rather than excerpts what's been included. Well, who has the information, I suppose, is the question. In this case, I think both the Irish News and the BBC have received information.
I thought the Irish News published it.
They have published. I suppose the question is, have they published them all, or did they publish excerpts? There seems to be some confusion
There's partial
about that.
tweets where there is parts of the tweet they have covered and other parts they have left out.
I think there's also the question of was there any post-evidence communication?
Yeah. Well, do we want to write to those who seem to have received these? Now, hopefully we will get this from from Mr. Mackay himself. But I think to ensure, I suppose, the fullness of our fact-finding at this stage, do we write to both of those organisations that have received the transcripts and ask them, have they published all of it? Or is it excerpts? My understanding is it's excerpts of our partial.
Sure, they'll be journalistic.
Well, they could do, but they may want to share that.
Sure, if we're writing to Mr. Mackay asking for his version, do we write to Mr. Bryson and ask for his version as well? Because he's the other person in the communication, so we're asking Mr. Mackay for his version of the Twitter messaging, or Mr. O'Hara, whoever the person was, instigating it. But you know, Mr. Bryson takes two to tango. He's the other correspondent. And I know he's gone on public to say that he wouldn't cooperate with anybody on these things, but I think it does no harm to ask. He may well be able to provide other elements of correspondence that might shed more light. I would do no harm.
Yeah, well, there's a suggestion.
He might offer to come and give evidence.
Oh, he might.
There is a suggestion there. You know, I think we do need to be very careful about the sub judice and about not entering into other aspects of this. And I suppose, do we have confidence that that will happen in terms of a correspondence or an exchange?
Chair, just to say, I mean, I would just reiterate my point at this and not make it again. The wider this goes, the more important I think it is that we have an opportunity to advise the committee. The committee has sought to ask some specific questions thus far, and I guess obviously it may get some answers that may lead somewhere else, but just encourage the committee to maybe think about that as we keep extending.
Chair, is it not wise for us to suggest what we think would be useful, and then if the clerk was to give us advice on that, then obviously we can reflect upon it?
Philip, would it be, so looking at this, would it be better to write, as we've agreed to do, to Daithí Mackay first of all, see what information he supplies? Then on the back of that information, we could then take a look at who else we should correspond to in terms of, depending on next steps and advices, and I will give the clerk some time to do that. But that it may be that we then want to write subsequent to that to say this is what we've received, this is what has been said. Can you confirm or deny that that is the case, or is there anything in addition? I think that probably touches on Jim's point about post-evidence.
The only benefit of doing it simultaneous, it allows you to compare and contrast, rather than just say, well, do you concur with what Mr Mackay said was in the correspondence? There may be other things there that Mr Mackay may not be aware of, that Mr Bryson is. If as the correspondence was between is suggested between Mr O'Hara and Mr Bryson, then there may well be things that various parties are not aware of. So I think it's just trying to get this in the open as best
I think my suggestion on that would be that we do, I suppose, first of all, do committee members want to meet again next week in order to discuss some of the correspondence, and if we can find any replies back, do we feel that we should, given the urgency and the seriousness of this, do we want then to wait, is it next week, week after? If it's next week, we could ask the clerk to supply some advice in relation to that wider.
There's unlikely to be any replies by next week.
I don't think, I agree.
Start giving it a fortnight.
I think
We've given the Minister for Finance 7 days, so...
Yeah, so if we're content, we can meet again in 2 weeks' time. And I think for that, and I suppose that's the next action point, is in relation to consideration of options on the back of that. So hopefully at that point we will have collected a number of facts in relation to this. And we'll also have some confirmation from the Minister that he will come along and speak to us as quickly as possible.
We should, I think, Chair, follow up your point which you made originally, and write the personnel involved. And I appreciate Mr Allister's point about journalistic privilege, and I mean that's a fundamental freedom. But I think anybody, the committee should publicly make clear today that anybody that has any information about the matters that this committee has been forced to scrutinise by the actions of a Sinn Féin chairperson, that anybody that has information relevant to our legal duty to scrutinise what has occurred, that they should provide that information to the clerk of the committee for distribution to the members. I think there is a public interest and there's a public service obligation on anybody out there who has any information about any inappropriate relationship between witnesses and potential witnesses to this inquiry, contact either direct or indirect to provide it to this committee to enable it to fulfil its legal duty to scrutinise.
I think, Chair, too, that the proposal that Philip made, right, to Mr Bryson, and taking into account, his role in it, and he's at the heart of it, and he may welcome the opportunity to come back and do presentation or... I
have no doubt of that. I think that, again, it comes back to the point which is one of evidentiary worth, and I want to make absolutely clear, and this applies to this current issue that we're considering, it would apply to whatever the issue or inquiry that we're looking at. I have no intention in my role of a chair to ever open up things to be for entertainment purposes, for Walter Mitty characters or anything else to come along and give what they term to be evidence when it's just hearsay of very, very little evidentiary worth. I think we need to be more professional and committees need to be very professional about this, particularly because of the privilege that committees have in terms of the evidence sessions. So, if it is relevant and if it is appropriate, absolutely, I think we should call whoever needs to be called. But I think we certainly need to be careful as well in terms of this. I certainly would be hesitant around widening it at this point until the point we have a terms of reference for what we want to do, because we need to be very clear we're not going to encroach into the Commissioner's inquiry, but we can ask the clerk to bring forward the recommendations as quickly as possible to us on that.
Yeah, Chair, I think I'm not proposing that he comes before the committee again, but just from a written perspective, to actually get the facts. Again, what we're trying to do is ascertain what the facts are as part of this process to re-establish the credibility of the Finance Committee after the previous debacle. And I think, you know, being able to compare and contrast people's submissions is obviously a very useful part of that. I'm open to guidance, as I say, and advice on our boundaries and rules and all the rest of it, and I will take that on board. But I think it's something that we should actively consider. My concern is timescale. I mean, this is a key issue now, and people's expectation is that actions take place as quickly as possible. I know that's not always simple, and there are timescales, etc., and process that has to be undertaken. But the more that we can expedite this, I think the better, both in terms of, back to the point of our credibility, but also to allow us to get to the bottom of the information that we wish to see.
Okay, well, we've got a suggestion there, but first of all, can I, so I'll just run through this. So there is a suggestion that we do write to those organisations that have received these transcripts and request a copy of those transcripts, accepting the point that there, of course, is privilege if they don't want to give that, but it may be a useful way of getting those full transcripts at the earliest possible opportunity. Are we content to do that? All those in favour? All those against? Okay.
On the basis that, and I'll state it again,
Yes.
that we are crossing a line into investigation.
There's been a suggestion there in terms of writing to the witness that has been mentioned in the revelations of this week. There's also been some suggestions about taking further advice on that. Do members want to write now and ask them for those transcripts? Do we want the clerk to provide some advice to that and maybe consider that in 2 weeks' time?
Well, I'd propose that we write to him unless there's some good reason as to why we can't.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Chair, can I suggest, you know, as the clerk assistant has said, you know, the potential for opening this up further. There have been a number of suggestions throughout the meeting, and of course they haven't all been considered. I can prepare a paper for the next meeting looking at all the suggestions, and you know, provide a paper that you know will consider it in relation to both the ongoing NCA investigation and still enabling the Commissioner to undertake his role without any committee impact on that.
My sense is that there is a line here between writing to the previous chair of the committee, writing to the minister, because there is a scrutiny, there is a role there, and then starting to go into other witnesses potentially. Certainly I think my preferred approach at this stage would be to ask for that paper and to consider then what potential other witnesses within the confines of a very clear terms of reference. But I understand the point that you're making, Philip, but I just wonder, is there, you know, given that we have a number of letters there to be sent off, I'm not sure how much damage is done by waiting 2 weeks in order to take a communication.
Could I just say, I would very much welcome what the clerk has advised. I don't accept there's a difference between the difference that you're making there, Chair. And I, as a member of this committee, to keep me right, and indeed to keep the committee right, I would welcome a paper in relation to every single option that has been voted on here. Because we heard from the information having from our clerks, having already voted. And I really think that some of the decision making here has not been the best, and I would very much like some guidance in relation to every single decision that has been made.
Okay, and we hear your point. Of course, the clerks are here to advise us, and they will provide advice on request. But there have been decisions made.
Well, I'm formally requesting that. I'm formally requesting that advice. And is there anybody here who's opposed to us getting that information?
And I've indicated that
on all the aspects, I'd very much welcome that.
What is a delaying tactic?
No, it's not a delaying tactic. I'd very much welcome.
I would propose to the committee that we continue to action, that the points that have been agreed will be actioned immediately, but we will also ask for that briefing paper. And there's no objection to getting the information with the briefing paper to inform our next meeting, but the action points as agreed should be actioned immediately.
Now that we have the clerk's assistant, can I ask, is there any reason, legitimate reason, why the committee today should not have the advice that the previous clerk gave to the chair?
I mean, I'd have to think about this, but in terms of our general position, is any information we hold will be made available to this committee.
Can I request that we get the advice that the clerk gave to the then chair of the committee in relation to these proceedings?
If there was additional advice above and beyond the guidance.
What will all advice that he gave to the chair in relation to these matters?
provide any information the committee wants.
Is there any technical difficulty with the fact that we've changed clerks?
No.
So we can go back to Shane and ask him for that material?
We'll provide any information we have to committee, commissioner, whoever asks us.
Okay. Do members have any other suggestions at this point? I think we've had a very lengthy discussion there. I think we've got a number of good actions arising from that. I would reiterate that this is very much about getting to the truth and to being as helpful as possible, and absolutely in the context of the appropriate people will investigate, and we'll look at that in advice next week. We have agreed, I think, to meet again in 2 weeks' time. And just then, sort of last point on the agenda, just any other business.
Is that our normal Wednesday, or is that going to be a Tuesday?
No, I think it's an early. We were scheduled to have a way day, or our day of
Planning meeting
planning
on
meeting
the 6th.
on the 6th. So it would be bringing it forward. But I think I don't think we should be waiting any longer than that time scale to have another meeting to consider these issues.
So what we're saying, the same day as our planning meeting?
Well, I think we should work
Makes
around.
sense.
Yeah. So we'll work around the planning meeting to ensure that we can have.
Is the planning meeting the 6th or the 7th?
Sorry, it's the 7th.
7th.
Is that Thursday?
That's
It's a Wednesday.
That's a Wednesday.
I'd suggest
So
that.
which day are we meeting for this purpose?
We'll meet on that Wednesday.
On Wednesday.
Yeah. Okay, so any other business? Okay, well, I'd like to thank members again for coming in to the special committee meeting. And we will meet again on the 7th, so meeting adjourned.
29.